Welcome back to BBN After Dark. We had our catcher preview last week. We have our first base preview this week. And again, if you didn't catch out our catcher preview, talked about a ton of different players. And I mean, by the end of this, we're going to talk about nearly every single player in the entire Bears. Everybody's going to get, 30 seconds to a minute, if not more. So a lot of guys to talk about. Very, very exciting. First base, I'll tell you what. I feel like the status of first base in the Bears right now is either you got a superstar at first or you got a guy who's got to prove it. I feel like this is a very star power heavy position. The catcher preview, we only had one player I considered a superstar. First base, we have four. But outside of that, I think there's a lot less maybe, interesting middle of the road options. I think a lot of the guys that we're going to talk about outside of the superstar category either have something to prove or they've never really done it at a high level. So I think it's a very interesting position to talk about. Very excited. Bernie, weren't on the catcher preview. Good chance to get you here on this one. Bernie, just give me your thoughts at the first base position overall in the Bears. How do you feel about first base as a whole?
Yeah, like you said, there's a lot of superstars at this position. It's usually one of your better hitters plays first base, but there's a lot of guys here who have been here for a while, and their bat has really came along to where they're in that sleeper, maybe even breakout category. So it's an exciting position.
Yeah, it definitely is. KJ is joining us as well. And KJ, let's go ahead and get right into it with the superstar category. Again, I broke all these players up into the same four tiers as the catcher. So we're going to talk about superstars, veterans, depth, and then up and comers. So that's going to be the four kind of categories we break these players into. Let's start with the superstars. And KJ, I want to start with a player who maybe not the number one player at the first base position, but for me at least, the most surprising player from last year to really jump into this tier, and that's Lucas Wilburn. I mean, a monster year. I think hands down, Lucas was the second best first baseman in the Bears last season, a 558 batting average, which is insane for a 14U player. He struck out at just 4.9% while having an extra base hit percentage of 19.1. Just an absolute monster. KJ, give me your thoughts on Lucas Wilburn's 2023 and where do you see him in 2024?
Yeah, it's always rare to find a guy who can hit for a ton of power and also limit the strikeouts. And Lucas Wilburn does both those things. And I think he was first known as a elite pitcher, and now he's really taken his game to being an elite defender. I know he's been playing the outfield. He's good in the outfield. We know he's great at first base, and he's turning into an elite hitter as well. I mean, this guy does hit every ball hard that he's playing. It's older pitchers in the BWL, and he's batting towards the top of the lineup every week, putting up really good numbers. So I think it's going to be another season of improvement on Lucas Wilburn's already really good resume.
Yeah, and Lucas Wilburn joined a pretty exclusive club last season. We've only had 7 Bear players in the history have a 30 double or more season. Lucas Wilburn joined that club last year with 31 doubles. I mean, this guy's just a beast. I do say right now, KJ, it's more doubles power than home run power. And I just want to get your thoughts. Do you see Lucas Wilburn becoming more of a home run type hitter, or do you see him more as a gap to gap power, high batting average, and he'll hit a couple home runs, but never double digits? What do you think, KJ?
Yeah, I think for Lucas, it's all about launch angle. He has good velo at the plate. He's got a good exit velocity. But if you watch him swing compared to how Joey Burgess is swinging and free swing, just the launch angles are different. So I think it's an adjustment that can be made, but not necessarily that has to be. I think Lucas is hitting home runs either way. But if you really devoted, to improving launch angle, something we worked with a couple different power hitters like Joey Burgess, I'm sure we can get him some more home runs. But if I'm being completely honest, I don't think we should really touch Lucas Wilburn's swing that much right now.
No, I 100% agree. I will say I do think there's a little more room in the body to get a little bit stronger. I mean, he's still like he's strong, but he's still, relatively a skinny kid. So I think if he puts on 30 pounds of muscle, maybe some of these gap doubles end up going over the fence. But 100% agree. Lucas Wilburn, I said he was the second best first baseman. I mentioned some of his numbers. Well, let's talk about the best first baseman in the Bears last year, and arguably the best offensive season for a Bear in the history of the St. Louis Bears, and that's, of course, Harrison Blaybaum. Um, there are 8 players in the 30 double club. There's only one player in the 50 double club. That's Harrison Blaybaum last year. Broke the Bears record for hits, doubles, and extra base hits. Had an absolutely monster season. And Bernie, when you're looking at a player like Harrison Blaybaum, I think the question is when you have a player who last year was obviously in his 11-12U season, and he has this monster year, what's kind of the next step? So first, Bernie, I want you just to touch on what was it like coaching this guy game in and game out, putting up these monster numbers. I mean, 57 doubles. What'd you guys play? Like 75 games. So nearly a double a game, an absolute monster season. Bernie, give me your thoughts on the 2023 season of Harrison Blaybaum.
Yeah. Coach this guy this year. And every time he's off the bat, you expected something great to happen. I think his batting average ended up being, well over 700. So I know we were joking about this the other day because we were going through some projections for this upcoming season. It was Harrison going to be as good as he was last year? Well, that's hard to do statistically because it's almost impossible to recreate the season that he just had. He was simply amazing every single at bat. You expect something good to happen. And going into this year, like I said, it's gonna be hard to recreate that season, but I'd like to see him keep the extra base hits up. You talk about a guy who had extreme power with barely striking out. That was the definition of Harrison. So yeah, I think he'll have another great season. It's gonna be hard to replicate what he did last year, but he'll have a great year.
Yeah, and when you look at Harrison, his 71 extra base hits last year, Bernie, he could go down 20 extra base hits. He could hit 20 fewer extra base hits and still lead the Bears next season. That's 100% doable. So, listen, I'm not going to doubt Harrison. I think, I think you'd be stupid to doubt Harrison, but I do think it's going to be tough for him to replicate these numbers. But just because he doesn't replicate these numbers doesn't mean he won't still be the best hitter in the Bears next year. I think 50 doubles is possible again for him. He had 57 this year. Even if he takes a step back, I think he's going to be, we've never had a player hit 40 doubles before. So I think Harrison, 40 doubles seems like the floor for him. That seems like the worst case scenario. So just a monster year. There were only 3 players last year in the 20% or higher extra base hit percentage and sub 10% strikeout rate. And Harrison Blaybaum, of course, led that. Harrison actually had an extra base hit percentage over 30%. So just a monster year. And KJ, I did want to get your opinion on this. So I mentioned, these numbers absolutely ludicrous for Harrison. KJ, if you were going to take maybe a little bit more of a realistic, maybe even more of a pessimistic approach, what do you think is kind of the, lower end of the possible scenarios for Harrison next year? What is the worst his stats could look?
Yeah, I think, the worst his stats could look is still a great season for a lot of players. I think it's inevitable this guy's going to hit home runs. I think it's inevitable this guy's going to hit at least 400. But my only worry with him in the BWL, all these pitchers are attacking him with curveballs, and it seems like at this point he's missing fastballs because so many people have thrown him so many curveballs for so many weeks and on. When he does get a fastball, he's missing it, and if that continues to spiral, and that could be the only issue for Harrison. But knowing Harrison, this is going to be an issue that lasts, a couple of weeks. He's so quick he started hitting the curveball. So this guy, he's going to be one of the best, inevitably. I think the worst case scenario for him is he's the second best player on his own team, under Rudy Montenegro Langley, who we'll talk about in the third base preview. But Harrison's gonna have a great year.
Yeah, when we're talking about the worst case scenario for a guy is probably still a top 10 player in the Bears. He's a superstar. Obviously, this guy, I think you got to say he's the best hitter in the Bears right now. And just really excited to see what kind of numbers he can put up next year. Like I said, I think 40 doubles is inevitable for him. I think 100 hits is inevitable for him. And both of those numbers are very exclusive clubs in the Bears. So for those just being routine for him is pretty crazy. The next two guys, both I considered in the superstar tier, but I'm not sure they're quite as clear cut as the previous two guys we just talked about. And the first one I want to talk about is Landon Nickerson. This is a guy who I think all of us considered a top 5 hitter in the Bears going into last season, and he certainly put up a great year. I mean, no doubt, but it wasn't quite the dominant Landon Nickerson year that we could have. 7 homers was top 5 in the Bears, but we maybe expected 10 to 15. He had an OPS at 1189. Maybe we expected him to be more toward the 1300 range. So he was still amazing, no doubt. Kind of like we're talking about a Harrison. He was still great. And this is maybe the worst case scenario season for Landon, but he wasn't quite that superstar level player. And Bernie, I want to get your thoughts about Landon Nickerson. We talked about the type of team that he played on last year. And, we said that we thought he was going to be the best hitter on his team, just that monster type season. And you could argue that he was, but I think there were courses of the season where he was not. So, Bernie, what do you think about Landon's 2023 season? And what are your kind of expectations for him in 2024?
Yeah, we were just talking about how, Landon didn't have his best season, but he's top 5 in, all these stats. He was, one of the best in the Bears in RBIs. And he was debatably still the best hitter on his team, on a team that is absolutely loaded with Andrew Willer, Ben Combs, Ivan Saxon, all the superstars on that team. So we're in worst case scenario this season, he was still a top 5 in a lot of stats and the best hitter on his team, arguably. I think next year gets right back to it. I think there's no reason to believe he's not going to be the best hitter on his team. I think he will be, and I think we'll be back to talking about Landon as, the top 5 hitter in the Bears.
Yeah, I will say in the BWL, I feel like he's looked pretty good. The power hasn't quite been there in the BWL, but again, these pitchers are pitching him so cautiously that it's tough for him to get a lot of fastballs to hit. And I feel like he's done a lot of damage on breaking balls, and that's always going to be a thing for him. You look at his career, he's basically been a 480 hitter for the last couple years, especially when he's playing his own age. He's never really hit below 400. Last year he had just 429. And again, his OPS dropped about 200 points, but I think for him, it's going to be a bounce back year in terms of I think he's getting back into that top 5 in the Bears caliber. I think obviously in terms of ceiling, I mean, who's got a higher ceiling than Landon Nickerson in the Bears? So I got pretty high hopes. Like you mentioned, Bernie, he still led the Bears in RBIs, which is pretty crazy. Or not, he didn't lead the Bears, but he had over 100. He was top 5, like you said, Bernie. Yeah, I mean, this guy's a beast. I still think at his floor, he's still a top 15 hitter in the Bears. So excited to see him hopefully get back to that top 5 going into next season. The next guy, KJ, who I feel like is a little bit more on the edge of this superstar category, but you still put him in there, is Naifri Kabarkis. And Naifri still had a very good season. I mean, hit near 500 with a 1200 OPS. I think for, looking at the power numbers, he only had 1 home run last year, which I think is really shocking for me because he's such a big power hitter. He did have 13 doubles, so he was still very, very solid. But I do think there's a lot to be desired in terms of his last season stats, in terms of how many extra base hits he had. I mean, when you look at the other 3 names in this tier, Harrison, Lucas, and Landon, they all had an extra base hit percentage 15% or higher. Naifri was at 10.4%. So again, that 496 average looks really good, but when you look at a player like Naifri, I think you hope for a little bit more power. KJ, there was stretches that he looked like he was one of the best in the Bears. Obviously, former rookie of the year, former number 1 prospect. What did you think of Naifri's 2023, and what are your expectations for 2024 for Naifri Kabarkis?
Yeah, I thought Naifri, he had a really slow start in the spring. But I thought his fall, I mean, he was one of the best in the Bears. In the fall, he really, I think in the spring it was kind of he would always hit the ball hard, but he wasn't pulling it. He'd always hit the ball hard the other way, and that would result in less extra base hits. You're hitting hard line drives, hard ground balls to right field. And then in the fall, he really started, pulling the baseball, being on time, being early on pitches. So. We'll see. I'm kind of indecisive on how I think Naifri's season's gonna go, but I'm pretty confident how it's gonna end. I think Naifri is going to end on top again. I think it's just does he take that slow transition again like he did last year? But like you said, I can see I want him to have more power, and I think he has all the abilities. He's got the exit velo, he's got the launch angle to do it.
Yeah, 100%. I think you can't doubt the talent, obviously, with Knifrey. I mean, ultra talented, one of the best players, one of the most talented players in the entire Bears. Just putting it together, having a consistent approach every single week, I think is where Knifrey could, and again, he's still a superstar. We still put him in this category. You can't put a guy who at 496 on the top team, you can't put him not in this superstar category. But I do think there's a little bit more. I would say Knifrey was probably around a top 25 hitter last year in the entire Bears, and I think his ceiling's obviously top 5, top 10. So hopefully, we could see that kind of dominance from our former Rookie of the Year once again. Let's go ahead and move on to the veteran category. This is a bunch of guys who have been in the Bears for a little while, expected to be on the top team for their age opening day, or at least at some point in the season expected to be on the top team. This is a bunch of guys who, again, I think didn't quite put up numbers last season that you could say was superstar level. But also, these are guys who are very good players, going to probably be in the starting lineup for most of the teams that they're on, and are just very, very solid players. And let's go ahead and start at the top of this one with Kobe Kennedy. And, Kobe, if you look at just his numbers straight up, you would say, how's this guy not a superstar player? But of course, he didn't do it on the top team. I think it's hard to call a player not on the top team a superstar, but I do think the door is open for him to be a superstar this year. So KJ, I'm going to throw this one to you. Kobe, I know he's a guy that you've kind of been driving the train for a little bit in terms of his potential. With how crowded 15U is, KJ, do you see Kobe being a top team player opening day? Do you see him being in the top team lineup? And what kind of numbers do you think he could put up if he is a 15U Floyd player all season?
Yeah, he came up to play with Floyd towards the end of last year, and he had we could have had success up there. He looked like he belonged up there. But like you said, fitting him into this lineup might be a little tough with all the star power they've got. I could see. I think it's either one of two great situations for Kobe. Obviously, he's going to be on top team, and maybe he has to earn that starting role, or he plays on Driscoll and he's a superstar of that team where he can put up some big numbers as well. So either way it goes for Kobe, I think it's gonna be a successful setup for him. But knowing Kobe, I know he wants to play, and I think he has a good enough bat to make the case he should be in the lineup for the top team. It's just figuring out, is he going to be the first baseman? They have a lot of different candidates that could be an EH. So, where's he going to be? I know a lot of guys have stepped up this winter. Eric Latrina being one of them, who plays around the same positions that Kobe plays. So it's there's a lot of tough decisions to make on, who's going to be the first baseman, who's going to be the EH, who's going to be where. But I think Kobe has just as good as a case as anyone.
Yeah. And Kobe Kennedy, certainly the talent is there for him to do it. And I do think he has taken a step up in his work ethic. This offseason, I feel like he's been really putting in the grind to be on that top roster. And I do want to go ahead and move on to another guy who's probably competing for a roster spot, maybe even a lineup spot in the EH position, and that's Evan Little. Evan, formerly a top 10 prospect, obviously going into last year, I think he was on one of our breakouts or sleepers list. I don't know, it might have been mine for all I know. It was one of our breakouts or sleepers lists, and this guy, I would say he had a little bit of an inconsistent season, extra base hit percentage below 10%, which I think is, uncharacteristic for Evan. I think we expected a little bit more home run power last year. When he did homer, it was magnificent. I mean, those balls were way out. I think he has the case for one of the farthest hit balls of the year last year. But I do think we didn't see it do him quite often enough, or at least maybe as often as we kind of expected. Bernie, when you look at a player like Evan Little and maybe a competition between Evan and Kobe for the last spot in the lineup or even a spot on the roster, how do you feel about Evan Little going into 2024, Bernie?
Yeah, like we've all been saying here, a lot of competition for that team at first base. Evan Little's extra base hit rate, like you said, was below. Did you say it was below 10%?
Was below 10%, yep.
See, like that for me at least. When you see Evan Little, right, you expect it to be higher. I know he's not the speediest guy. Some of these balls in the gaps I think maybe he's not getting doubles on, so maybe he's getting cheated a little bit on extra base hits. But I think that should still be well over 10%. And like you said, being more consistent with the home runs. We've seen the balls he's hit, off and on where he hit a ball so far, Grand Slam 3, it was all over BBN. Just being a little more consistent with it, right? Because we know, or at least I've learned this winter, that he is a Gold Glove first baseman. He's a great defender, which I did not expect out of him. But what I've learned this winter. But yeah, just being a little more consistent with the offensive bat. Rob, he's going to go with the offense guy, and that could be Evan Little with just a little more consistency.
Well, and yeah, Bernie, like you mentioned, obviously Evan's not going to be getting these hustle doubles. And I actually, before I said it on the show, I actually wanted to double check and make sure my numbers were right. He only had one home run last year. I feel like we all remember it because, yeah, like you said, Bernie, it was our hack of the week on BBN, way out of Grand Slam 3. But that was the only one he hit. And I think that's where Evan, who's not going to get these sprint, speed doubles, that's where he's got to make it up is the home runs. I think when you look at Evan's power and his size, you're going to need more than one home run. I think he needs to be pushing double digits. So for him, I think that's kind of the step he needs to make to get a little bit more consistent in that regard. So obviously, Evan, super high ceiling. Maybe it would be better for him to start the season on Driscoll, let him get comfortable, kind of like how Kobe did last year, where let him be on Driscoll and have a monster summer on Driscoll. Let him be one of the best hitters in the Bears, and then go ahead and move him back to the top team and see if he can compete. So I still like Evan Little a lot. Like you said, Bernie, I've said for a long time, he's a much better defender than people give him credit for. He's pretty slick over there. And I'm very hopeful for him. He's going to have a monster season going into this year. Moving away from the 15U Floyd roster, let's go ahead and get a little bit younger here. And let's talk about the 11U Floyd situation. And let's start with Cooper Woolen. This is a guy who, I'll be honest, I didn't really know him at all going into this winter. Obviously, I'd seen the name on Game Changer. I kind of knew a little bit about his stats, but I never really knew about the kid. And this guy's really impressed me with his work ethic and just his attitude. I mean, he's a very smart, baseball smart kid. He's a very positive kid, very hard worker. And I like this guy a lot. I think when you look at the numbers last year, extra base hit percent, over 10%, very solid for his age. The two numbers I want to focus on, he had a very high strikeout rate and a very high walk rate. And to me, again, I wasn't at very many 11U Floyd games, but that screams passive, right? If you're walking a lot and striking out a lot, that screams to me that you're being too passive. And I think for Cooper and, a little bit of a hint here later in the show, we're going to talk about Cooper maybe a little bit more in depth. But I think for Cooper, if he can really buy into being aggressive, I think you could see a monster step forward for him. Bernie, I actually want to get your thoughts here on Cooper Woolen. I know you've been running 11U practices over the last, 2-3 months. What do you think about Cooper Woolen, Bernie? What do you think about his 2023? And what are your thoughts on his 2024?
Yeah, me and you were kind of the same boat in the realm that before the winter, I really did not know this kid. I mean, I seen him around. I seen his name pop up a few times, but I didn't really know the kid. And going into this winter, he showed me that he's ready to work hard. I'd put him among the elites of that 11U age and hardworking, I guess you could say. But he's a great kid. I think he's worked really hard this offseason. I think that he's right in the middle of the competition for be the starting first baseman for that team. And I think, yeah, like you said, the walk rate way up, strikeout rate way up. I think he's been a little too passive, but I think this winter he started to buy in. I think that is going to, propel him to have a nice 2024.
Yeah, I know a lot of guys are excited about him, including Mac Floyd, his coach. Very excited for Cooper this season. And let's talk about his competition at first base, Whedon Hainline. Whedon, I think, started probably the majority of the season at first base last year. Very solid defensively. Obviously, we know what Whedon does on the mound. But definitely, I think where you're looking for Whedon to take a step forward this season is with the bat. For Whedon, kind of the same thing as Cooper. Both his strikeout rate and walk rate were over 30%. Again, to me, screams passive. And I feel like Whedon, I haven't coached him in a while, but I did coach him when he first joined the Bears, and I was impressed by how much pop Whedon generated with how, small he was at the time. And now Whedon's put on some muscle over the last, 2 off seasons. He's added some swing speed. To me, I feel like he's got the potential to be a very solid hitter. And I think Whedon, he could be due for a very nice season. Again, the offensive numbers for him, not pretty last year, but I do think he's good enough defensively. And obviously, he's good enough on the mound that you're keeping him on the roster. You're giving him a chance. And I think Whedon could definitely take advantage of his opportunities. I want to see him get more aggressive. And I think he's definitely got opportunity for a little bit of a better season going into 2024. Okay, let's go ahead and move right along here. Let's talk about Trevor Anderson. This is a guy who was the talk of BBN for probably about 4 weeks last year at the end of June, early July, where he was just going on an absolute tear. You know, he joined the 14U Floyd roster and was immediately a top 3, 4, 5 hitter for that team. And then everybody kind of forgot about him in the fall. You know, he was playing football, so he missed some weekends. When he did play, he was with the Bell roster. So I think everybody kind of forgot about Trevor Anderson. KJ, I know you've gotten a chance to coach him here in the BWL. Trevor, when you look at just his flat numbers, I mean, a beast last year, 15.3% extra base hit rate, basically the same strikeout rate. So he's hitting just as many extra base hits as he was striking out. An OPS plus of 123, OPS over 1200. This guy did it all when he was on the field last year. KJ, what do you think about his 2023? And what are your thoughts for Trevor Anderson's 2024?
Yeah, I think he had a successful last season. I think going into this year, he's better than he was last year. I know he's more consistent with the bat. I kind of saw him as a hit or miss kind of guy last year. I think, you know what you're going to get out of Trevor this year. I think you're gonna. I've seen him show some power. He's got the velo. The one thing I'm a little worried about with Trevor, he's not pulling a lot of balls. A lot of his hard hit balls are in the right center gap. And, that's not a bad thing, but it's showing me, we haven't really seen his full, potential. We haven't really seen what he can do when he's getting on time consistently. So I'd like to see a little bit more of that from Trevor. And that could be because he's playing with, older players in the B League. But I'd like to see him get a little bit more on time. But I think when this guy's locked in, he can be one of the best hitters. He's got the size you want. I think it's just figuring out, we have him on the first base preview. Is he going to be the first baseman? And if he is, that's going to earn him more at bat. So a lot of things to figure out for Trevor. But, I'd be excited for him with the season he's going to have.
Yeah, and KJ, sorry if you mentioned this. I was looking at some Trevor Anderson stats. So sorry if you already said this, but the question mark for him is going to be his defense and how consistent he's going to be at first base. I think, he's a natural third baseman. But I do think the opportunity for him this year is going to be at first base. So, especially like I think we talked about it in a couple shows ago, and we kind of went through the position battle show. We talked about how Trevor's, it's his job to lose for the first 6 to 8 weeks of the season because Lucas Wilburn's going to be playing at Vianney, with his high school team. So Trevor has a chance here to, take the job and run with it, kind of like some of the 15U Floyd guys did last year, that he's got a ton of potential. And, as a first baseman, if you hit, maybe we can give you a drop ball or two. You can make up for a drop ball with a couple doubles, So I do think Trevor has that kind of potential. And I do think he's got the potential to be a very good first baseman defensively. I don't think that's out of the cards. He's very strong. He's very athletic. So we could definitely see a very good season for Trevor Anderson. Let's move on to Elliot Myers going into his final summer with the Bears. And I'll tell you what, Elliot, he had an interesting year last year with the bat. Obviously, we know what he does on the mound. But Bernie, I want to get your thoughts on Elliot's season. He had a career high batting average last year. He had the second lowest strikeout rate of his career, the second highest extra base hit rate of his career, and the highest on base percentage of his career. So Elliot, although the power was a little bit down from his 2022, I think well-rounded was maybe the best offensive season of his career. Again, career highs in batting average, on base percentage, and then second career high in strikeout percentage and extra base hit rate. Bernie, what do you think about Elliot Myers' 2023 season? And obviously it's his last summer with the Bears here. So what do you think about kind of his last send-off with the Bears? What do you think he's going to do with the bat in 2024?
Yeah. Honestly, I can't say I was a big, Elliot Myers advocate when it came to the bat. But if you just read me those stats, it would make me think that he's poised to have a great 2024. All the stats you just said. Look, he got more consistent, it seems like, with the batting average. I think that if he can, now stick that batting average, with the power. He was down a little bit in power, but I think he can get right back to it. He has, monster, massive home run power. I think if he stays consistent with the average and the extra base hits, start to come back a little bit, he'll have a great year. He'll be right in the middle of that ATU Floyd lineup.
Yeah, and for Elliott, we've always known that the potential's there, and obviously he's known as a pitcher. He's playing college baseball next fall as a pitcher, so what he does with the bat is just bonus. But it is nice to see. I mean, you go through his career. Here are his last 4 seasons from 2020 to 2023. Here's his batting averages: 170, 260, 330, 350. So it's just been a continual upswing with his bat. I've been impressed with him. He's always put the work in, and he definitely did not kind of confine himself to a PO role. He's been a very solid player for the Bears, so very happy to see what Elliott Myers has done in his career, and hopefully he has a great send off this summer. The final player here in the veteran category, I want to save this guy for last because to me, he's maybe the most interesting conversation here in this category. This is a guy who formerly was square in the superstar category, formerly a Bears MVP, but did not quite have an MVP caliber season last year. And that, of course, is Vince Dalton. Vince was still very good, an OPS plus of 101, so he was above average for his team. And again, when I say his team, we're talking about one of the best teams in the Bears. So he was right above team average in terms of OPS plus. The strikeout rate, 27%. That's about where he's been his whole career, but the big drop off was his extra base hit rate. He did still hit 8 homers, but he only had 8 doubles. And if I can really quickly pull it up here, Vince Dalton, he's coming off a year last year. He hit 21 doubles and then dropped down to 8. So the home run power was still there, but the doubles power was completely gone. It felt like when he did make contact, it was going over the fence, but he wasn't quite making contact enough. So, KJ, what did you think about Vince Dalton's 2023? He was still solid, no doubt. He was still a very productive hitter for his team, but definitely not the Vince Dalton we've come to know and love. What do you think about his 2023, and how do you think he can maybe bounce back in 2024?
Yeah, I think his 2023 season, that's the first year of him really, buying in and using a drop 3 consistently. I think that can attribute to the downfall on extra base hits. But I see Vince right now, and he is fully, used to the drop 3 bat. He just beat his drop 3 record with exit velocity. It's over 100 miles an hour again. And if you watch him in free swing, the launch angle looks much better. I think for a long time, he's trying to break his drop 3 record exit velocity. And so he's swinging so hard. He's pulling his head, hitting a lot of balls on the ground. And I think him chasing that for so long, got him into a bad habit of just, spiking the ball into the ground. But I think now he's trying to hit for distance. He's getting back to the launch angle. If you watch him in free swing, he's hitting, balls high and well out of the HitTrax parks. So I think the extra base hits are definitely going to come back for Vince in this coming season.
Yeah, and when you look at his last 4 years, Bernie, I actually want to get your thoughts on this. In 2020, Vince was a monster MVP caliber player, 140 OPS, beast. 2021, a little bit more of a down season. Hit about 270, 109 at OPS plus. And then 2022, he's a beast MVP again. And then last year, took a step back. If that trend continues, Bernie, we're looking for a monster type 2024 for Vince Dalton. Do you see him potentially getting back to that MVP caliber player? What do you think about Vince Dalton's 2024, Bernie?
Yeah, like we've all said, he's one of the best. When you think about the Bears, you think about some of the best players. You think of Vince Dalton. I think he gets right back to it. I see no reason why not. Like you said, his OPS plus was still above average on one of the best teams in the Bears on a stacked line with Jack Dalton, Teagan Kryler, Jack Roberts, Tyvor. And that's a stacked line. He was still above average in that lineup. So I have no reason to believe that. I don't believe in this trend necessarily, but I see no reason to believe why he can't be a superstar in 2024.
Yeah, 100%. I think the home run numbers are very safe for Vince. I think he's going to hit, if you combine his high school stats with his summer stats, he's going to hit double-digit home runs in 2024. I think the question is going to be when he doesn't hit the ball over the fence, how consistent is he going to be? And that's always been the thing for him. But I'm pretty high on Vince Dalton. I got to say, I did kind of see the cracks in the armor last year, with BWL. He didn't have a great BWL last winter, and I kind of thought maybe this wasn't going to be a Vince Dalton MVP year. I didn't expect him to, have 8 doubles, but I definitely didn't necessarily expect MVP. This year, I'm pretty high on Vince Dalton. I think he's going to have a monster year, and I'm very excited to see what he does in 2024. Let's go ahead and move on to the depth category of players. These are guys who are probably not going to be on the starting lineup of the top team on opening day. We've got some rookies here. We got some prospects. We've got some guys who, maybe are going to be on the bench of the top team with potential to be in the lineup on opening day. And I do think this is a very interesting category. We are going to group these players a little bit and talk about them in groups of 2 or 3 just to, move along a little bit. We unfortunately don't have enough time to go into every single player in depth, but we will talk about every single player. Let's talk about a couple of 14U guys. I've got 3 guys here who are all first basemen at 14U who all, have the potential to I would say all 3 of these guys have the potential to make the Floyd roster at some point next year, and all 3 of them I think are competing for that starting job on Bell if they don't make the top roster. And that's Liam Killian, Jacob Villette, and Eric Rahi. I think all 3 of these guys have different strengths and weaknesses. I think all 3 of these guys have shown things in the past that would lead you to believe that they could be top team players at some point in their career. But I do think all 3 of these guys have different levels of of work ethic, of potential, of defense, of offense. So I do think it's a very interesting conversation with these 3 players. So when you look at these 3 players, and KJ, I want to start with you here. Liam Killian, Jacob Villette, Eric Rahi. If you had to say which of these players do you think is the best defensively right now, and which of these 3 players do you think is the best offensively right now, between Killian, Villette, and Rahi?
Yeah, I'd say, defensively, I would say Eric Rahi is probably the best defensively out of that mix. He's taking huge strides with the glove. I mean, he went from a guy who couldn't catch the ball right to his chest to a guy, who's making good picks at first base. So, I would go Eric Rahi defensively. Offensively, I would go with Jacob Villette. This is a guy with a small frame, and if you've never seen this guy play, you wouldn't think, this guy's a good hitter. And this BWL season was the first time I really got to watch him, play, and the ball just pops off this guy's bat. And he like I said, he's got a little frame, but this guy, he swings big, and he's hit some balls that if we're outdoors go very far. He's had a really good BWL season at the plate as well.
Yeah, Jacob Villette, he's been a Bear for a long time. When you look at kind of his career stats, last year, 371 batting average. He's hit between 360 and 380 3 years in a row, so he's been very consistent. The number that I think has wavered a little bit, KJ, like you kind of mentioned, is that extra base hit percentage. And I think as the players around Jacob maybe got bigger before he did, you saw some of his extra base hits, instead of getting over the outfielders' heads, we're getting caught. Some of them were staying in front of the outfielders. So we've seen his extra base hit kind of decline over the last 3 years. But with the work he's put in this offseason, I think you're going to see potentially a career high extra base hit rate for Jacob. Last year it was 6.5%, his extra base hit rate. I could see that potentially doubling going into this season. So I'm pretty high on Jacob Villette's offense and going into 2024. I'm pretty excited about him. The player you didn't mention, Liam Killian, this is a guy who I think, he's very solid on both sides of the ball, both offensively and defensively. I think, he's also a big pitcher. So for him, I think Liam, he's looking to, and I would say if you definitely look at the bodies, you would think Liam is the best of these 3 guys. I think there's a lot of potential for Liam Killian. I would argue he's got the highest ceiling of these 3 guys, but he may also have the lowest floor, Liam Killian does. So I think all 3 of these guys are poised for some pretty good 2024 seasons, and I'm excited to see all 3 of these guys play. Moving into the next group of players, I want to talk about 3 guys here who are all 16U players. These 3 guys all, I think, have, again, things you like about them, things that maybe are a little bit more concerning about them. But I do think all 3 of these guys have potential to be very solid players. And that's Ethan Mon, Mason Lukens, and Cannon Cook. I like all 3 of these guys. Definitely they've all worked hard at practice. I've there's been moments in this winter that I've been like, man, that guy can play. And I've been talking to all three of these guys. So I think a lot of potential is there. Bernie, if I were to ask you the same question, I think it's pretty obvious Ethan Mon's the best hitter. But when you look at defensively between Ethan Mon, Mason Lukens, and Cannon Cook, Bernie, who do you think is the best defender of those three guys?
Yeah, out of those three guys, if I had to pick a best defender, I've watched Ethan Mon play a lot of second base over the course of the winter. He's been very good over there. So, you assume if he plays second, he'd play first. But I mean, Mason Lukens, I would call probably the best defender. I mean, he's made some slick picks in practice. I think he's very reliable over there for that team.
Yeah, I've also have been very impressed with Mason Lukens' defense at first. He kind of strikes me as like Evan Little, where you look at Mason and you don't think he'd be that good of a defender, but he's actually pretty sure-handed and pretty slick. I've been impressed with this guy. KJ, do you know much about Cannon Cook? I know, he joined very late in the fall, so didn't get a ton of game action. I have some thoughts about him if you don't, but what have you seen from Cannon Cook, KJ? You have any thoughts about Cannon?
Yeah, I think Cannon is pretty slick with the glove over there. I know he's got a good lefty swing. And it's just about, finding consistency for him. Sometimes I think Cannon Cook looks really good, and then, you know, maybe he has, three bad practices in a row. So it's just about finding consistency for him, and this is probably his first time playing this high level, baseball, this big of intensity in practice. Um, so I think it's just an adjustment. It's got to be an adjustment for Cannon that he's been slower maybe than a lot of others to make. But I think he is going to make it, and I think this guy does have a lot more talent and tools than a lot of the other guys have.
Yeah, and I will say for Cannon, he does swing hard. I mean, maybe it's just one of those things that when you're in Rob's cage, he's screaming at you to swing with everything you got. So maybe that's part of it. But when I watch him get in Rob's cage, he does swing the bat as hard as he can. He misses sometimes. He pulls his head too much. But I do think the potential's there for Cannon to, have a really nice season. Again, he didn't play much at all. He joined very late in the fall, so I'm not sure he got more than maybe 10 plate appearances last year. It was not very many. So this is going to be his first real season with the Bears, and I think there's a lot of potential with Cannon. He seems like a good kid. He definitely is a hard worker, so I'm excited to see what kind of 2024 he's going to have. And then Mason Lukens, I think the question is just going to be the bat. When you look at him, he's got a ton of potential. I mean, he does. When he does make contact, the ball pops off his bat. I think the question is just how often is he going to make contact? How often is he going to square the ball? The next guy I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about him on his own because he's kind of an interesting case. I did want to put everybody in the position previews, but I do think this player is definitely more known as a pitcher than he is a hitter, and that is Elijah Underwood. Bernie, we don't have to talk about Elijah too much. I think he's definitely kind of shifted into that pitcher. You know, I don't want to call him a PO because he's still going to bat, but he's not going to play much defense. He does play first base at practice, so I threw him in the first base preview. But Bernie, what do you have to say about Elijah Underwood's bat? I will say the stats are not that bad. He had an 80 OPS plus, which again on the surface doesn't look that great, but when he's playing with Dalton, that team, an 80 OPS plus really isn't that bad. Bernie, what do you think about Elijah Underwood's bat?
Yeah, I've known Elijah for a long time. I've joked with him many times that, you're just a PO. I'll joke with him about it a bunch. But if you look at his stats really aren't that bad, like you said. I think that he gives this team some good at bats when they need him. I think that's the same role he's going to play this year, right? He's going to be one of the best pitchers on that team. But I think when he's called upon, he's going to give you good at bat, right? And some good things will happen when he hits sometimes.
Yeah, I mean he does got the power potential. He's a big, strong kid, and he is not that bad at first base either. I mean, obviously he's not going to get much chance to play there with Vince and I think they have another guy who plays first base them as well. But Elijah is not that bad over there, so he's a very solid player. I think if he were on a more inferior team, he could potentially be a very good hitter and defender. But just the situation he's in, he's on that team to pitch. But I did want to throw Elijah in the position previews. The final two guys I have in the depth category, these two guys, I'm not sure very many people really know about. One of them is a rookie this year. One of them, I believe, is in his second year with the Bears. These two guys, Again, I think the 95% of the Bears population doesn't know who they are. But I do think both these guys have decent potential in their own right. And these two guys are Brandon Wheatley and Dowd Ishmael. I want to start with Brandon Wheatley. This is a guy who I would say I've gotten very polarizing opinions of him, where some practices, I think this guy is a beast. I think he's the next coming at first base. And then some practices, I'm like, man, this guy, he is struggling over there. So, I've seen both sides of the coin with Brandon, and I'm not sure what the true Brandon Wheatley is. Obviously, the optimist in me wants to hope it's the guy that I see 50% of the time that looks like a monster that makes me want to put him with the top group, and not the guy that maybe, just goes a little slow and just kind of meandering, drops easy balls. So I've seen both sides of this guy. Bernie, I feel like you kind of had similar vibes. I know for a while you liked Brandon Wheatley a lot, and now I feel like when I asked you who the best first baseman is in your group, you very rarely send me Brandon Wheatley. So, what do you think about Brandon Wheatley, Bernie, in terms of his 2023 and potential in 2024?
Yeah, this is a guy that, I think out of the gate, I mean, I like it to start, right? And I still like Brandon Wheatley, but, there's just been some other first basemen I think that, we've talked about a lot of first basemen 15 on this show so far. And I think all first basemen across 15 had a great offseason. I think there's a ton of them who have worked very hard. I think there's guys who, I don't want to say past Brandon Wheatley, but, just had better practices, right? Kobe, Evan Little, even Evan Wheatley, right? They've had some good practice recently, but potential is definitely there for Brandon. I haven't really seen him hit too much, but he's a pretty good defender. So I'm excited to see what he does in 2024.
Yeah, and Brandon, I think the big thing is just consistently. I think, Evan Little is very consistent at practice. A guy we haven't talked about yet, Atticus Slocum, is very consistent in what you're going to get from him in practice. Brandon sometimes looks like a superstar and sometimes looks like he doesn't care, and I think that's where if Brandon can get a little bit more consistent in the work ethic, I think he's got a higher ceiling than some of those guys that you mentioned, Bernie. I think sky could be the limit for this guy. He's very athletic. He's very good with the glove. And when you look at his numbers last year, he put up some stats that make you think that he does have potential with the bat. I still like this guy overall. I get frustrated with him sometimes that I feel like he's not putting everything on the table. But I do overall think that this guy's going to have a solid season. And, when you're talking about the 2025 season, maybe we could be talking about this guy as fighting for a roster on the top spot. So the other guy is Dowd Ishmael. This is a guy who has always had the big power potential. Defensively, I will say this guy's much improved on the defensive side of the ball. I honestly, I'll say I told Bernie I think this guy's an EH. I didn't think he had much potential at all on the defensive side, but he has kind of proven me wrong in that regard. He's been very solid. But KJ, from your opinion of Dowd, especially with the bat, everybody sees the high ceiling. What do you think is the potential for Dowd to really put things together offensively this year?
Yeah, I think it's just buying into the swinging hard with reckless abandonment approach for Dowd. Obviously, he's got the size we want, but he doesn't swing with that size. A lot of times it looks like maybe he's afraid to strike out, he's trying to put the ball in play. And I like to see Dowd, hey, if I'm going to strike out, I'll strike out a couple times, but I'll add in an extra base hit in there. And I'd embrace that kind of player persona if I was him. But he hasn't really shown me anything to make me want to say that extra base hits are going to come. But I think Dowd has the size and he's got the strength that if he just really bought in to swinging with some reckless abandonment, he would see a huge spike in extra base hits.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the power, the size is there, the potential's there for Dowd. I'd love to see him, I'd love to see him hit a ball out, hit a couple balls out. I think with his size, kind of like we talked about with Evan Little, home runs is going to be the path for him because he's not going to get a bunch of hustle doubles. He's probably not going to hit for a super high batting average. He's got to do hitting balls over the fence. And obviously he's got the potential and hopefully he can put it together going into this year. The final category of players we have is the up-and-comers. These are guys who are either rookies or, prospects, guys who could be on the top team potentially opening day, but a bunch of guys who I think have been really impressive, guys who are going to fly up the prospects rankings going into this into our next prospect list in March. And let's go ahead and get things started here with the top two guys. Again, going to break these guys into pairs. these two guys at the top, I think, are probably the most proven of the group. Both these guys have had good seasons in the past, and I think are primed for probably their best season going into 2024. One of them is a rookie. One of them has been here a little while, and that's Anthony Young and Jude Ramirez. I think Jude Ramirez is a name who's kind of caught on across the BWL season. He's had a very nice BWL year. He was with the B League, and even now with the A League, he's been very, very solid. And I think anybody who didn't know Jude definitely knows him now, especially if you're around the 15-year-olds. And then Anthony Young, who I've always liked. I've liked him since he joined. But I think this is the first year he's getting some real traction from basically anybody outside of me and maybe JT Byrne. I think more people are starting to get on to Anthony Young, and he had a very good year last year. I mean, let's just talk about some stats. Anthony Young hit 400, which when you look at him, you see him as maybe a boomer bust type guy. He really wasn't. His extra base hits definitely leave a lot to be desired, but he struck out sub 10% and hit 400. I mean, you can't really doubt that. A 118 OPS plus on that Burn squad. And he played Young as well. And Bernie, I want to go ahead and get your thoughts first here on Anthony Young, a guy who I think we've always liked the work ethic, but now it seems like he's really starting to turn himself into a very good baseball player. Bernie, give me your thoughts on Anthony Young.
Yeah, this was a guy that last year, I told JT multiple times that I was like, you need this guy on your roster. But I know from a logistics standpoint, with having the two teams he was trying to balance out, and just a number standpoint, he needed Anthony to play a lot with that young team. And I think Anthony got a good chance, to be the everyday first baseman, bat 2, 3, 4 in the lineup and be a superstar. And then he came up to Byrne in the fall, and he was still doing the same type of thing, right? He was still, batting middle of the order, still putting up big numbers. So I think going into this year, he's going to be in the competition for first base. And I think that, if he doesn't win the first base spot, he's going to get at bats at EH. And I think he's, in a good position here to have a good season.
Yeah, and then Jude Ramirez, KJ, I think I started hearing about him in the fall when he joined. Obviously, he's you look at the size. I mean, he's very instantly makes an impact when he walks into the room. KJ, and now that you've kind of seen him in the BWL, what are your thoughts on Jude Ramirez going into 2024?
Yeah, Jude seems like a guy who can kind of hang with all levels of pitching. We've seen him do it in the B League. We saw him do it in the A League. So, again, he's a guy who can hang with everyone. I think he took big strides at the end of the fall last year. And I know he got on Rob's radar. So I think it's just about, obviously he's a tall, kind of lanky kid. Adding some muscle onto him would be the biggest thing for Jude. Adding some extra velo, and adding some, I think he can miss practices. He can miss games. So I think adding some, just being better about being at things, I think would be the best thing for Jude. But in a potential standpoint, this guy's got all the potential in the world.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I think Jude's got on a lot of people's radars this offseason. This next pair of guys, you got one rookie, you got one guy who's been here a little while, kind of like the last group. These two guys, I think, are a little bit less proven and maybe a little bit less excitement around them. Although I will say the last couple of weeks, I think, both these guys have gained some traction. And that is Evan Wheatley and John Armbruster. Evan Wheatley, obviously a rookie. I do think he's got a little bit of the Elijah thing, that I think he's kind of going to be known as a pitcher, but definitely not to the same extent. I mean, Evan's still going to take a lot of at-bats. He's probably going to be the starting first baseman for whatever team he plays on. But I do think his kind of hype's going to be more in the pitcher preview we do. And then John Armbruster, who, like I said, has been here a while. I did want to mention, I was doing some, when I was going through and really diving in deep into stats this winter, I started to see a trend that when you see players who 3 consecutive seasons, their extra base hit rate goes up and their strikeout rate goes down, those players tend to be very successful in the 4th year. And John Armbruster fits into that category. 3 consecutive years, his extra base hit rate's gone up. 3 consecutive years, his strikeout rate's gone down, and I think we could see a monster year for John Armbruster. So let's go ahead and start here. KJ, give me your thoughts on Evan Wheatley as a hitter. I know you love him as a pitcher, and we'll talk about him a lot in the pitcher preview. But what do you think is Evan Wheatley's kind of, what is his projectability at the plate?
Yeah, again, for Evan, he's got all the size. He's got the strength. I think it's just about buying in more to the hitting approach for Evan. I think in the pitching side, like you said, On the pitching side, he's all the way bought into the approach. I mean, the guy just pumps strikes. He can throw every pitch he's got for strikes. And I think as a hitter, sometimes, um, his timing's way off a lot. He's late. He's got a good hard swing, but he's late a lot. So I think getting in that mindset of, I'm trying to pull this ball. I'm trying to pull this ball over the field fence. I'm trying to hit it through the fence. Getting that in Evans' head would be the biggest thing for him. And I think, like you said, his pitching's been so good. I think that's going to earn him more opportunities at the plate, and more opportunities to get more exposure with the bat.
Yeah, and then John Armbruster, Bernie, I know you haven't been quite around the B League too much, but Johnny A has really come along the last couple weeks, had some big hits in this week of the BWL. But just going on to what he did last season, I mean, Bernie, I'm going to list some stats here. These were all career highs for John Armbruster. He had a career high last year, and again, he's been here for 3 years now, so this is a 3-year sample size. He had a career high in batting average, OPS, extra base hit percentage, career low strikeout rate, career high on base, slugging, doubles, hits, RBIs, really across the board, everything was a career high. This guy's gotten better and better every year. Bernie, give me your thoughts on Johnny A heading into 2024.
Yeah. I haven't been in much B League, but the times I've been there, I remember there was one day in particular. It might have been Johnny A's first day. I don't think he was drafted. I think he was picked up later. So I think it was his first day in the B League. I saw him take 2 at bats. He saw two pitches. One of them was a hit. One of them was one of them was an out. But both balls were smoked. He was up there attacking the first pitch fastball, and I think that he's really bought in over this past year. Bought in what we're trying to do, right? Being aggressive early in counts, hit the fastball, hit it hard. And I think that going into this year, going into 2024, I assume to open the year, he's gonna be put in a spot where either he's at the back end of the Floyd roster, or he's going to be a superstar for Bell. He's one of the best hitters, and I think either situation is great for him. But yeah, this guy at some point over the next couple of years will be a top team player.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Bernie. I think he's due for a monster 2024 season. And I've liked John since he joined, but I think this year is really the season. And I'm probably the highest I've ever been on John Armbruster. I think his bat is top team ready. I think obviously the rest of his game still needs to develop. He needs to get a little bit better defensively. Obviously, he needs to get a little bit more baseball IQ in terms of base running and, just the small things that top team players have to be able to do. But I do think his bat strictly is top team ready. So I'm excited to see the type of year John Armbruster puts up. And then the last 2 guys here in the first base preview are 2 guys who are both, I would say probably not going to start the year with the top team, or at least definitely not in the lineup. But 2 guys who I think have had great off seasons, and I think both of them we are very excited about going into 2024, and that is Atticus Slocum and Tucker Pawnall, a couple lefties here to end off the first base preview. Let's go ahead and start with Atticus Slocum. This is a guy who I think his work ethic has been unmatched since he joined, and now that he's really put on a lot of size, he came in very skinny, and now he's still skinny, but he's starting to put on a little bit of size. He's hitting and throwing harder than he ever has in his life, and I think he's playing the best defense he ever has in his life. I'm really excited about this guy. And then Tucker Pawnall, who I think has been here, Bernie, is this his second or third year with the Bears?
This will be his second summer. He was there when I took over.
Second summer. So it's the end of his second year. But I think this is a guy who, again, was super, super raw coming into the Bears, and now he's turned himself into a very solid player. I think defensively, it's kind of the opposite of John. I think defensively, Tuck is top team ready, whether that be at first base or in the outfield. I think strictly defense, Tuck is ready to be on the top team. The question is, what's he going to develop as with the bat? Both these guys, I think, had definitely some hitting stats that needed to be improved when you look at their last year's stats. But I think both these guys have put the work in. Bernie, I'm actually going to have you talk about both these guys here. Give me your thoughts. What do you see as kind of the similarities of Atticus and Tucker, and what do you kind of think of them going into 2024?
Yeah, both kids I think have had a great offseason. They both worked really hard. But with Atticus, the bat is the question mark. Right? I think the question mark is the bat with both of them. But I think Atticus taking a lot of big strides. I think he's bought into what we're trying to do here. When he joined last fall, I don't know if he exactly was, but this winter he definitely has been. I think that going to 2024, Atticus is going to, probably be one of the better hitters on that Latrina team. I think he's going to have a chance here, take a lot of at bats. That's what he needs right now. He doesn't need to, be on the back end of the Floyd roster necessarily and not getting at bats. I think he's still relatively new. He needs the at bats, and honestly, same thing with Big Tuck. Again, newer to baseball, I think that he needs all the at bats he can possibly get. I think whether he's on the back end of my roster or the second team, I think he's gonna have a great opportunity in 2024 to take the next step and prove why he should be on the team in the fall.
Yeah, I like both these guys a lot. I'm very hopeful for both these guys to have very good seasons. So I'm excited. Both these kids are great kids. So we'll see what the 2024 has in store for them. To end off the show here, we're going to go through our sleepers and breakouts. Once again, a sleeper is a player who's a little bit more under the radar, is going to put up a better season than maybe the general population expects. Hey, breakout is a guy who's going to go from whatever tier he's in right now and jump 1 or 2 tiers higher. The tiers are prospect, what do we call the 4th tier? Basically rotational player. I don't remember what exactly we call it, but prospect, rotational player, starter, star, superstar. And those are the 5 tiers. So again, sleeper, player under the radar, breakout, a guy who's going to jump from, basically a prospect to a starter, for example, would be a breakout. So we've talked about all these guys already, so you don't need to go too in depth. Just kind of give me your pick and maybe, 2, 3, 4 sentences about them. Let's go ahead and start with KJ, your sleeper at the first base position.
Yeah, my sleeper is going to be Cooper Woolen. This is a guy who I think he was known a lot for his pitching. Last season, that's where he got a lot of his opportunities. And I think this year, his bat has gone to another level. I think he has the second highest exit velocity of that age. And that's all been from this season. It seems like this guy breaks every single night he's in there. The launch angle is there as well, which is something pretty rare that we don't really see with guys this young. And I think Cooper is going to hit some balls very far this year, and he's going to hit a lot of extra base hits. I do think, the strikeout rate is still going to be high. But I think, like you said, seeing a guy with a high strikeout and a high walk means he's being passive. I think Cooper is going to take less walks. I do think he's going to strike out less. But I think the extra base hits are going to go way up.
Yeah, like you said, I like Cooper a lot. I definitely second that pick. Bernie, your sleeper, Ethan Mon. I mean, this is a guy who, again, big hitter. I think good season in store for him. But give me your thoughts on Ethan Mon, your sleeper at first base.
Yeah, look, I think that 16U Burns is going to be one of the most slept on teams coming in 2024. I think this guy is going to be one of the best hitters on that sleeper type team. I think this guy's going to bat right on the line. This guy's going to have a lot of opportunities, and he's going to put a good offensive year, right? I think the extra base hit rate will be up. He's to strike out a ton already, so yeah, he's going to have a great 2024.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go with Atticus Slocum. This is a player who, one of the things I remember this story about him when he first joined. He was on the 3rd level 15U team, and again, when he first joined, he was very raw and very, still had a lot to learn about tournament baseball. And he said, "What do I got to do to not be on this team?" And it was a funny thing because when people say that, I would say a lot of times when people say that, one of 2 things happen. Either they get the answer and they are like, well, I'm not going to do all that, and then they quit, or they get the answer and they go into hyperdrive and work hard. Basically, Atticus said, what do I got to do to not be on the 3rd team? And we told him, you got to work hard. You got to put on 30 pounds of muscle. You got to put on 15 miles per hour on your exit velocity. And Atticus has gone and worked to get to all those goals. I think this guy, again, if you want to be one of my favorite players, be a hard worker, be strong, be big. And Atticus, maybe not quite strong yet, but definitely on the right path. And I think Atticus can have a really nice season. So he'll be my sleeper at the first base position. Now, breakout. KJ, who's your breakout at the first base position?
Yeah, I'll go with Anthony Young. Here's a guy Bernie kind of touched on earlier, and I think Anthony has taken, he's got a lot much mature this off season with the bat. I think he was a guy who swung at a lot of breaking balls, swung at bad pitches. And I think Anthony has added a lot of power. I really have, and he's playing against older pitchers. These are going to be college level pitchers he's facing in this BWL, and he's put up a really respectable season this year in BWL. I do think you're going to get some strikeouts. He still does, have that big free swing approach. He might swing at some fastballs over his head. But you're going to get a lot more extra base hits out of Anthony than you did last year. The exit velocity continues to improve. His launch angle continues to improve. And I'm big on Anthony Young coming this season.
Yeah, 100%. I second that pick as well. Bernie, your breakout at the first base position.
Yeah, I'll be the guy who goes, I think, with the most obvious candidate on the board. I'll take Trevor Anderson. I think this guy has all the opportunity in the world this season. Look, he's going to probably, I think he's the favorite to open up the year as the 14th Floyd starting first baseman with Lucas Wilburn being, at Vianney and all. And I think that he's going to take this opportunity. He's going to, even when Lucas Wilburn comes back, he's going to hit well enough to keep himself in the lineup when he comes back. And, even if it's not first base, somewhere else. And I think he will be a big time hitter for his 14th Floyd team.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. I think there's no doubt Trevor, given the opportunity, I think he's going to be a beast with the bat. So very excited for Trevor. And then my breakout, I'm going to be honest. I had a different player written down, and then I kind of talked myself into my official pick here, which is going to be Johnny Armbruster. The more I kept thinking about it, I think Johnny Armbruster is going to have a Kobe Kennedy-esque year where he's going to be, whether it's on the Bell squad. I think if he is on the Bell squad, I think he's going to be a monster. I think he's going to put up big offensive numbers and kind of lead that team and everything. And if he's on the Floyd squad, I think he's going to push the starters to kind of fight his way into the starting lineup and really make his mark. The more I've seen of Johnny A, the more I keep kind of talking myself into him. I think he's going to have a monster year. I think the work ethic is undoubtable when you talk about John Armbruster. Again, when he joined the Bears, he was not good. I mean, I'll just be blunt about it. He was not good. His first season with the Bears, he hit 211, struck out nearly 50% of the time, had no extra base hits. And now he's turned into a guy who I think is going to be a real force to make the top team. Or if he's on Bell, I think he's going to be a beast. So I like Johnny Armbruster a lot, and I think he could be a monster going into 2024. So that's going to do it here for our first base preview. Again, talked about a ton of guys today, so very, very excited. Next week, we'll continue on with our 2024 position previews with second base. And I think that position is a little bit kind of the opposite of first base, where instead of the superstars and then everybody else, I think second base is a position where there's not that many superstars, and you're looking at a lot of guys who are in that kind of veteran category. So I think it's going to be a fun position to talk about. But that's going to do it for this episode of the BBN After Dark. KJ, Bernie, thank you for joining me. We'll talk to y'all next week.